Due to the graphic nature of this show, and trying to stay within YouTube's advertiser-friendly and community guidelines, I've been forced to take a different approach with this review, so please excuse the odd style of this video. In the past week or so, Netflix has released a show called Big Mouth. Actually, they released 2 animated shows, but we'll talk about the Magic School Bus Rides again at some point later on, I'm sure. This review is based on the more controversial of the 2 shows, Big Mouth. I watched it the day that it aired. I saw the trailer when it initially dropped, and just from that, I knew that I was going to have to talk about the show in some form or another. It was an awful trailer. Actually, I don't know if that completely explains it. The trailer for Big Mouth might just be the worst trailer for anything ever in history. But a trailer is a trailer. I waited patiently for this show to come out. And I watched it, or I tried to. I have to be honest, when watching Big Mouth, at least the first couple of episodes, I had a visceral reaction. My reaction to the show was so strong that I said that I didn't even want to review it. Yeah, it took even a lot of doing and thought to even get this far and make a review in this style. If you're wondering, I've only pulled that card once before, saying that something is too bad for me to review, with Where the Dead Go to Die. I'd leave an annotation guiding you to that video, but YouTube killed those. Where the Dead Go to Die was a movie that went out of its way to include every kind of horrific thing that you can imagine, to the point where it was too much for me to handle, and it was certainly too much for YouTube to handle. It had things like bestiality and necrophilia, and other things that I don't want to think about. Whether Big Mouth is too graphic, or out there, or bad for me to personally watch and review, it is definitely too graphic for YouTube. I will say that it is another animation that I don't want to think about, but it's a strange piece, and it has gotten such a mixed reaction. As in, people either like this show and think it's clever and funny and it holds up well with other cartoons of this era, or they hate it, to the point where it's one of the worst cartoons that they have ever seen in their life. I posted my initial reactions, and I've talked to Phantom Strider about this, and we had a discussion on the merits of the show, and he's made his own video. And in the meantime, I've been examining the response to my, response. On top of that, before the show even came out, it was given to various reviewers, and it held 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, a 7.2 on IMDb, and was rated positively by Vanity Fair. It was clear to me that this was much more complex than I initially went on. As a reviewer, it's always good to keep in mind that you never know what a piece of media means to someone else, and you never know what might be important or what has helped people in hard times. You know, people might say it's just a game, or it's just a movie, or it's just a television show, but they can mean a lot more to a specific person. People say things like, "that was my childhood," all the time, but I'm going a little deeper than that. For example, I understand that Totally Spies, which I found awkward and stupid, has helped people discover aspects of their sexuality or a particular kink. And then there are also things like Full House. That show is saccharine and cliché, but attracted a fan base of people who grew up or were living in an abusive home life, because it proved to be just the right type of an escapism, showing them a world where all of the problems in the world were relatively small and benign. Big Mouth seems to be taking this effect in its extreme. The show is about puberty, and how you remember your own puberty and your early teenage years is going to determine how you feel about this show. That's something I can tell you right out of the gate, and it's something that I've noticed immediately. And it seems to be the common themes with both the good reviews and the bad reviews. Speaking personally, my teenage years were extremely tame. Sometimes I joke around and I say that I've never really been a teenager. I never tried drugs, even marijuana, alcohol, or cigarettes. Even to this day, I don't drink. I avoided doing reckless and stupid things often associated with being an adolescent, etc. I don't say these things to brag. I just want to say where I'm at when it comes to how this show is trying to get you to relate. Most importantly, though, I've never had a sexual awakening that many teenagers get. I am asexual, I've said this many times, and I really don't like bringing this up as of late because it's gotten to be kind of tacky, but I do think that it's extremely important to the context of this review, as it was most apparent in my teenage years, and it really cast an unpleasant view on them in hindsight. My teenage years were the worst part of my life for many reasons, not all of which I'll get into here, but dealing with my peers and their sexual awakening was one of the worst and most annoying aspects of it. All I remember of the majority of my classmates is them calling me gay because I didn't have or want a girlfriend, while they were obsessed with drawing penises on everything. People develop a sense of sexuality before they develop a sense of irony, I assume. But yeah, the show reminds me a lot of that time of my life. If you find that obnoxious, like I do, you're probably not going to have a good time watching the show. Even going beyond sexuality, or lack thereof, if you find your own puberty awkward and stupid, which many people do, you might not like this show either. I've heard it described as that awkward conversation about sex that you have to have with your parents. A lot of your initial reaction is going to be on how you look back. Many people find this as a time of their life that they'd rather forget. You feel like your own body hates you, you're angry and you don't know why. People are expecting you to grow up, while they only give you the permissions and abilities of a child. You listen to Simple Plan unironically, it's just a terrible time. And many people start feeling sexual urges and have thoughts that they can't really articulate. And depending on the culture, might be told to be disgusted by them. I didn't grow up in a very religious household, but I know that some people did. In the first episode, a lot of people are very open with their sexuality, and that might not gel with what you remember, depending on where you grew up. Unpleasant times can be comedy gold. Much of comedy comes from misery, and if it's a scenario that anyone, or most people can relate to, there is potential for comedy there. You can make puberty funny in a way that you can make an extreme disease or even death funny, especially when a lot of people would choose the latter as the more pleasant experience over puberty. I obviously don't think that they succeed here, and with the strong backlash, it seems that many people agree. And why is that? Well, they try to relate rather than try to be funny, at least from the start, and that can get awkward, especially if you're in the wrong mindset. The first episode is about the main character seeing his friend's penis, and then becoming insecure that his friend's is bigger and hairier than his own, and then obsessing over that to the point where he's having fantasies about his friends becoming giant penises, and a basketball game played entirely by penises. If you don't remember being sex-obsessed, or you don't want to remember being a sex-obsessed teenager, it's just kind of uncomfortable. And I have to be forward, this show does make me very uncomfortable in a way that I haven't been watching a show for a very long time. It took me some time to even be able to articulate this without just ranting about how sexually charged the whole thing is. Maybe it's the Uncle Grandpa effect, where it shows me a world so alien to my own that I can't possibly relate to it. Or maybe it's the Malcolm in the Middle effect, where it shows me an aspect of my life or my past that I just want to forget, and as such I have a negative reaction to the show. Maybe it's a little bit of both, but I just find myself repulsed by a lot of what I was given in the first episode. The show personifies puberty as a raging monster that seems to be a parody of imaginary friend movies and shows. Only the person who has one can hear and see it, and it tells the main character to say and do stuff. Yeah, let's play teenager and put the sexual aspects in a folder called stuff and just hope nobody ever finds it and decides to look inside. I'd say that it's a cute concept, but the problem is saying that the show is cute kind of makes me feel dirty. Going off topic a bit, let's talk about the character designs. Here I'm not going to be polite or reserve hesitation. These are some awful character designs, and I hate the way the show looks. The people look like fish. It's like Shark Tale in reverse. I know that it's become a standard to put no thought or effort into your character design in adult animation, but I hate that it's become a standard to put no thought or effort into your character's design in adult animation. I am seriously sick at this trend, and it's very likely that I would have had a hard time liking the show on this facet alone. While cartoons aimed at children seem to be developing their own consistent problems, namely the lack of model sheets in shows like Steven Universe or OKKO, I don't think that I've ever seen one cartoon aimed specifically at adults that cares about the animation. I guess a lot of that comes from things like The Simpsons having all of their main characters yellow and having weird abstract shapes for their heads, and South Park being completely cut out. But we're at a point when this trend really needs to stop. Whether it's characters with absurdly large heads like in Alan Gregory or in Big Mouth, whether the designs are just unpleasant to look at like Mr. Pickles or like in Big Mouth, or a show that doesn't even understand the basics of facial anatomy, like Big Mouth. Also, Big Mouth is a stupid title. They name drop it at the end of the first episode saying that one of the main characters has a big mouth, but it's the most stupid title that you could possibly give this show. I don't know, maybe they're trying to make it sound like a porn username. I do not know. It's a stupid title. Back to the animation though. Look at this image here. The kid in the center is the king of these bad designs. His head is exactly the same size of his body. And unlike the Fairly Odd Parents, it's not exactly stylized to make this less noticeable. His forehead is half the size of his head, almost like they're trying to create an abstract painting. His eyes and eyebrows don't even look like they're attached to his head. But the worst detail would be his absurdly large mouth and lips with rounded teeth. His father also has a similarly bad design that's reminiscent of a not advertiser culture-friendly frog that I don't want to get sued or strike for mentioning. Seriously, I'm not the only one who sees this, right? It's strange because the show seems to have a budget, as the backgrounds and the environments are actually drawn well and very well detailed. It's just populated by freaky fish people. And I get it, the show's focus is on dialogue and situations. It's a script-driven show. But if you don't want to put any effort into the quality of the animation, don't make it an animation. The medium has specific advantages, but it also has specific requirements. And these designs just make me sad, like a sad frog, because I know I could do better and I'm still learning. Most of this review is focusing on the first episode, because the first episode is certainly the worst, as far as I know. As in, the show gets less creepy as it goes on. But these are the designs that they're going to be stuck with for the entirety of the show's run. And that's not a good thing. The puberty monsters do have decent designs and certainly look interesting. They seem to be taking influence from where the wild things are, which I guess is a pun in and of itself. But it really only communicates that they don't know how to allocate their resources properly. No matter how good the monsters look, most of the cast just doesn't. And it's really noticeable, and it's constantly noticeable, along with all of the other animation quirks that you get in adult cartoons like this. Characters standing in a room, not moving, just facing each other with half-elated expressions, talking about things that cartoons with higher budgets would actually go out of their way to show. I'm not asking for every scene to have anime fighting levels of quality, but you should at least convince me that you wanted to make a cartoon for some other reason than budgetary concerns. On that note, I should also state that the teenagers sound like full-grown adults. I don't mind it, but a lot of people seem to have a problem with it as a cliche that's really taken hold as of late, with shows like Gravity Falls or the new DuckTales, with kids that sound like adults. My problem is actually kind of the opposite, when a voice actor will use their exact same voice for everything they do. For example, no matter who Kristen Schaal voices, I will always hear Mabel, which gets kind of awkward when she plays a character like Sarah Lynn, but that's a discussion for another day. I'm going to level with you. My initial reactions to this show were extremely negative. Like, upon watching the first episode, I stated that I'd rather review another episode of Adult Party Cartoon. I'm probably not going to do that because it would largely be pointless, but I was almost going to make a joke about how badly I didn't ever want to think or look or review at this specific show, and that would lead to the Adult Party Cartoon review of, I guess, Stimpy's Pregnant is the other one that is really infamous. And yes, I am going to admit that I haven't watched every single episode. This is a review of episode 1 for the most part. When the first episode of your show is about someone's insecurities about their penis, and then the second episode is about someone's first period, I wasn't interested in getting to episode 10, which is apparently about porn addiction. And I know the argument already. BoJack Horseman got better after the first few episodes. I watched through that. The Legend of Korra got better after the first couple of seasons, and I watched through all of that. What makes this different? Well, if BoJack or Korra started on this level to me, I would have quit them early on and I wouldn't have looked back. I really do not like the first episode of this show. On top of that, I don't know how much I would eventually be able to get into it at all. Remember, it's a show about puberty, a time in my life that I'd rather forget for every possible reason and do not want to be reminded about. Needless to say, that's not going to pique my interest like Korra's world building and character development, or BoJack's intense emotional roller coaster. I gave the show as much benefit as I possibly could. A trailer is one thing, and yeah, it would be unfair for me as a critic to say that the show sucked based solely on the trailer. I mean, I can predict that it's awful through the trailer, that's fine, but to definitively say that the show is awful because I've only seen the trailer, that's unreasonable. This is a review episode 1, and I did get through episode 1, for better or worse. I had to force myself to do it, but I did it. And the video is titled Review of Episode 1. That's mostly because you can't put the title of Episode 1 in the title of a YouTube video without getting into trouble. But let's ask the golden question. Is this episode the worst thing ever? Like, where would I place it among everything that I reviewed? Because with what I've said, I obviously do place it up there. It's in the pantheon for me. But saying that it's the worst thing ever is becoming a more and more complicated question. For example, I think that Screams of Silence and Seahorse Seashell Party, the Family Guy episodes, could do legitimate damage if someone decided to actually follow their messages. And yes, I've actually gotten messages saying that people were actually listening to and suckered in by stupid and even borderline dangerous advice given by those episodes. However, as far as putting in things that I don't like and have a negative reaction to, Adult Party Cartoons Ren Seeks Help is a worse episode than them. But on a technical level, Patty the Pelican is the worst you can go with drawing and animation and such. I suppose it's the worst thing I reviewed so far this year, and I suppose I don't see it being topped by anything else. And yes, I am planning on reviewing the Slim Shady cartoon by year's end. I will say this. This show made me feel very uncomfortable for what I watched, and the last time that I remember being this uncomfortable was Ren Seeks Help. I can't even watch my own review of that episode because it makes me that uncomfortable. And I will admit, the clips and the imagery from this episode is part of the reason why this review is this way. You know, I've seen pus spewing splinters, people eating duck shit, lemmings pissing into a fountain for 30 seconds, and Will Smith is a fish. But yeah, this is the one that kind of broke me in that area. But that's just me. If you look around, many reviewers find it as an insightful take on puberty and the adventures that it causes in people's lives. Oh, and this is just an aside, but the guy behind Sausage Party is also behind this show, which is another thing that was despised for its trailer, but people went on to actually liking it. I still don't know why the trailer advertised as his friend who worked on Family Guy as being a part of this, like it was something worth celebrating. Am I saying that I can't give an accurate assessment of this show? No, I wouldn't say that. This is my point of view, and there are many, especially with a show like this. And also, much of the initial backlash has been moral outrage. Moral outrage to what? Well, it's a show about puberty and sexual awakening, and you could probably connect the dots on that one. I don't really want to talk about it, but it's an elephant in the room, and it's the most infamous part of this animation. The show follows characters that are canonically minors at the age of 14. And even the trailer does show their genitalia. One of the preview clips was basically one of our 14-year-old characters masturbating. Now, this isn't the first time an animated series has done something similar to this. The South Park Season 20 episode Wieners Out had a bunch of elementary school boys with, well, their wieners out. This show, though, I think the reaction comes from it being more about sex. It's more sexually charged. And I know this word is entirely inaccurate, but it's the best word I've got. Big Mouth has more realistic animation than South Park. The people are more designed to look like people, even though they fail massively. The crude cutout animation in South Park forgives a lot when it comes to the public perception of the show. While the people in Big Mouth don't look like people, they do look more like people than the people in South Park. And Big Mouth doesn't also have 20 years of preparation and building the will of a general audience. They just dropped a trailer of a 14-year-old boy masturbating and another one of a 14-year-old girl talking to her genitals. You can't expect that to not make people uncomfortable. You can't expect that to not give a negative reaction towards what they're trying to do. It makes the show seem like it's trying to be as edgy as you can possibly be, to the point where it's almost breaking the law. Is it legal? Is it illegal? I can't answer that. I'm not a lawyer. I will say that I am surprised that this was greenlit with the subject matter and the imagery that is within. That may sound strange, but in the United States at least, you can draw someone fucking a dog, ripping them apart, and then rolling around in the shit and entrails while saying every racial slur that exists. And you're going to be safe, legally speaking. However, when it comes to depicting minors in situations like this, you're walking a fine line. Even a drawing of a minor in a sexual situation can land you in big trouble. That's the law in the United States, and I do believe it's similar in Canada. As in, Netflix could have gotten into a lot of trouble for doing something like this, especially with the way that the trailer presented the show. It was a risk, and that's all I'll say on the matter. That's not a debate from me or here, and I've done my best to detach my thoughts from that aspect of the show. But yes, I will say that the taboo and questionable aspects of the show did not help my feeling unclean while watching it. To be absolutely fair, I don't think this is a situation like Drawn Together the movie was. That movie went out of its way arguing that censorship is bad by essentially throwing as much disturbing shit as possible, and making the best case for censorship that could possibly exist. I hear that the show gets much tamer as it goes on, but that's just what I've heard, and after episode 1, I have no interest in continuing with this. It's too much for me. This review has been all over the place, I kind of understand, but I want to give the show as much fair due as I possibly can. By its nature, it's going to cause some very intense reaction. Talking to me about the show while I'm watching it or immediately after is a different experience than talking to me after I've had a few days to cool down and get my head together. It's something that strongly invokes the emotion of disgust within me. You know, I find a lot of the aspects within repulsive. And my teenage years, which this tries to invoke, are something that I'd rather forget. And I guess the show really taps into that, because it's also something that I really like to forget. Also, what kind of name is Big